regulation debate. We are going to discuss about contracts for difference, and particularly on the role and the design that contracts for difference should have in order to fit in a real future-proof electricity market design. We are going to do so with a number of distinguished speakers. But before that, I would like to, first of all, give you some practical information on how the debate will be structured. Many of you already know our debates, but you are very welcome to participate in the debate via the chat. So you can actually write your questions. You have a box. It's actually Q&A. So please use that one to write down some questions you would like the panel to answer later in the second part of the debate. I will give now the floor to my co-host today, Alberto Prutoshnik. Please.
Thank you, Laria, and good afternoon also from my side. Very pleased to be here, and thank you for joining us. Indeed, we are going to discuss, or we're going to cover the role of design of contract for differences in a future-proof market design. As we all know, there's been a lot of discussions and debate over the last year and a half, 2 years, as to how to complement the short-term market design with an enhanced long-term dimension of this design. And the contracts for differences have been proposed as part of this enhancement. I mean, they're not new. They've been used to support renewables for many years in many jurisdictions. So we have quite some experience on how to design them and what role they could play. In the old days, it was about trying to provide additional support to renewables beyond and above what the market could bring. And now they are seen as a way of reducing the cost of electricity to final consumers by taking advantage of the fact that renewable generation is now somewhat cheaper, or expected to be cheaper than fossil-based generations. We'll see in the future what will happen. For sure, they help consumers and investors in generation to stabilize their cost on the one side and the revenue stream on the other side. So because the devil is in the details, so it's we are here today to go beyond saying, contract for difference will be part of the design. We're trying to see what role they could play, and more importantly, how to design them in a way that promotes not only, a more stable revenues for project promoters, more stable costs for consumers, but also avoid jeopardizing or avoid reducing liquidity and the relevance of short-term markets, which is something that we need in order still to promote flexibility, which is important to accommodate the greater penetration of renewables into the system. So we have to start with two introductory presentations from Paula Ceballos Coloma, Policy Officer for Internal Energy Market at DG Ener, and then Lena Kitzling, Head of Section Wind and Energy System at DTU. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Paula. Later on, we'll have a debate. There will also be the opportunity to ask questions. So please, if you have questions as we go along, please put them in the Q&A facility. So Paula, the floor is yours from the policy perspective.
Great. You hear me well? I understand. Yeah.
Yes, we do.
So I will share a presentation. Yeah, you see it. Great. So many thanks for inviting the Commission to this session. As you have said, contracts for difference, and in particular, the two-way contract for difference, are an important element of electricity market design review proposal. I would like first to give, because you have already given an overview, but why we included them in our proposal and exactly what are the provisions. But before that, I would like to come back to the context. No, so we had the high energy prices context in the past, and at the beginning, when the energy crisis started, there were many voices from politicians to journalists to the common public blaming the electricity market for the high prices. So they say that the markets do not work. We have to change something like structurally, and this volatility really has to be avoided. And this contrasted with the view of people working in the sector, right? That actually what we saw is that the prices were behaving as expected. We had a scarcity situation, so yeah, the high prices actually were giving a signal for consumers to consume less, and this is good. Otherwise, we might have ended up with having blackouts this winter. And volatility is actually a good thing, but something that has to be managed. So, what version has prevailed? Well, we had a public
Paula,
consultation.
sorry for interrupting you. We received questions from the chat that it's not really visible. Could you make it full screen presentation mode?
Yeah, sure. Because I'm presenting, so this is why. I mean, in my computer, I see the presentation.
No, we see the presentation, but not in.
Yeah, in presentation mode. So let me check. Sorry, because I'm not used to the to Zoom for the meetings.
If you do a slideshow on your computer and then you share.
Yeah, this is what I was doing. I was only seeing the slideshow myself, so this is why I'm sorry for that. Yeah.
No, no problem.
So maybe it's because this is without slideshow and this is with slideshow, and you don't see it bigger.
No, now we don't see it at all because
you don't see it at all.
You've stopped sharing the screen.
Yes. Sorry for that. So, okay, share. Okay, and now please tell me, so this is small.
I see myself.
Okay. This one. Is it okay?
Now it's coming, I guess.
Yeah. Do you see it
small? Not yet, but if you close the window on the right, the window on the right of the, I think this is now visible. Much better.
Yeah, but yeah, sorry, because I'm just sharing the screen of the presentation.
I think this is now.
So you're seeing the whole
Sorry, Paula, if you want, I can share, and then you just tell me.
That would be great.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, sorry, because I had also some problems before, so.
Okay.
So I will stop sharing.
So I hope. So it just takes a bit of time. Do you see it now?
Yeah, not yet.
Not yet.
No?
Not yet.
No.
Okay. So let's. Okay. Sorry. No?
Now we see it, yeah.
Okay.
So many thanks.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for
no problem.
we never use the Zoom, so this is why I was not used. So if you can maybe go to the third slide, next one. Yeah. So I was saying we had which vision prevailed. We know we had a consultation. It was a very popular consultation, more than 1,000 responses, and what we saw, thankfully, there was a big agreement among the respondents, a big support to the way the short-term markets work, saying that we should not change the system completely. But as Alberto was saying, we needed to complement it with more longer-term tools. And this while ensuring that there was investor certainty in order to bring to the market the investments in low carbon technologies that we need. And the two-way contract for difference is, together with other long-term tools like PPAs and more liquid forward markets, are a means of manage this volatility, while at the same time, they help to support the development of renewable energy. So next slide, please. Okay, So first, what are we talking about when we say two-way contract for differences? So this is copied from the text in the provision, but basically the only thing that we say is that there are direct price support schemes that they have to come with a limit to excess remuneration. They are designed in a way to preserve the incentives for the generator to operate efficiently in the market. So this open definition is left open on purpose because the objective is not being prescriptive and letting enough space so that innovative CFDs schemes can also be tested, like, for example, having a cap and a floor with a corridor instead of a single strike price, or having CFDs based on expected generation rather than the really electricity output put into the system, or having CFDs that instead of having reference to the spot prices at the underlying, they have reference to the forward market, whatever. Everything is possible with this definition that is now in the text in our proposal. So next slide, please. So the new provisions that we have included in the electricity market design proposal is that if a member state provides direct price support for new investment in a set of technologies, then this has to be in the form of two-way contract for difference. So as we've seen, this has to come with this, in addition to the revenue warranty, the upward limitation to the market revenues, so that when the prices are very high, the generators return these extra revenues to the state, and there is money available to redistribute among consumers. To which technologies applies this? Well, to those that they have more or less a stable cost, that they are inframarginal, and that they do not typically provide flexibility. So, for example, this is why hydro with reservoir was left out of the list, because the plants providing flexibility, we want them to be fully exposed to the market signal. And also we excluded from the list emerging technologies for which other types of direct price support schemes can be better to incentivize their uptake. So this applies to wind, solar, geothermal, hydro without reservoir, and nuclear. Then the text also says that the revenues collected by the state, so the state has an obligation to redistribute these revenues among all consumers on an equal basis. And this is in order for all consumers to benefit from the measure in times of high prices, which at the end was what launched this reform of the electricity market design that we've made. And then it also says that this redistribution should avoid removing incentives for the consumers to decrease their consumption when prices are high, or to move it to periods where the prices are a little bit lower. So, for example, you could imagine that for a consumer with a dynamic price contract, if the refund of the money is done on a monthly basis or quarterly basis, they still have an incentive to report to respond to the market prices on an hourly basis. So just some clarification. So this obligation refers only to direct price support schemes, but other forms of support are still possible, and these new provisions do not change them. So you can have investment aid, tax refunds, and this doesn't change that. This obligation only refers to cases where public support is needed. So how this public support, the support part, is approved is a matter of state aid rules and approval, and the new provisions do not change that. And of course, it is still possible and welcome, and this is something that we want to support and promote, that renewable energy comes to the market on a market basis without public support. And just a last clarification, because we usually get this question, the fact that one technology is not in the list doesn't mean that a member state cannot decide to grant a public direct price support scheme in the form of a two-way contract for difference. There's just no obligation. So yeah, I think we can go to the next slide. So these two-way contract for differences provide an benefit both for the generators and for the consumers. for the buyer, who is the member state on behalf of the consumers. It avoids, it creates a source of revenues when the prices are very high, and it avoids the so-called windfall profits that have been so much discussed in the past months. And thus it contributes to consumers' bill stability. So to this decoupling objective that it has been very much in the media, of decoupling the prices of electricity from the prices of gas. And for generators, they provide revenue certainty, and they reduce the capital cost of the project financing, which is a very, very big part of the total cost of the project. So there's a societal benefit, right? So it incentivizes low cost generation, clean generation investments, and it benefits to all consumers. So consumers really have an access to the cheap renewable energy. And we have seen in the crisis, so there are a number of countries that use contract for difference, and some of them they use two-way contract for differences, like France or Portugal. And we have seen during the crisis is that these countries, they have been able to collect a quite impressive amount of money that they have been able to redistribute with the consumers. So there are already examples out there of the benefits of this type of contract. So we can go to the next slide. And so these new provisions, they complement existing provisions in the EU regulations regarding the support schemes for renewables and how they should be designed. These today, they are mainly contained in the Renewable Energy Directive, in the state aid guidelines for energy and environmental protection, and in the temporary crisis and transition framework, which is a state aid framework that will be online until end 2025. And some of these design principles that are contained now in these pieces of regulations is that the support schemes should provide incentives for the integration of electricity, should take into account the grid constraints, should ensure that the renewable energy producers really respond to the market prices. Then the strike price or the level of support has to be auctioned. It has to be granted through open, transparent, competitive procedures. And for example, in the state guidelines, the new ones, they say that no support should be received by renewable energy plants when the prices are negative, in order not to motivate, to try to remove negative prices from the market. So these new provisions complement what it was there, and they limit the types of direct support schemes that member states can grant to this set of technologies to only one type, which is a two-way contract for differences. And with this, I pass to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. I think this is an excellent policy perspective background, and also thank you for clarifying some issues which might have created confusion. Then I'll pass immediately to Lena Kitzling. As I mentioned, she's head of section Wind and Energy System at the Danish Technical University. Lena, the academic perspective.
Thank you very much, Alberto. And yeah, it's been a great start from Paula already. So I think there's a lot of things that I can go over a little bit quickly. I'm sharing my screen now. Yeah.
Again, could you put it in presentation in a slide mode?
All right. I think that should work now.
Yeah. Perfect.
All right. So I'll take contracts for difference from a bit of an academic perspective, and also from the perspective of renewable support scheme design, which we have been working on for the past 10-15 years. So I will bring a little bit of perspective from the lessons that we've learned during that time. So basically, we can say that we are using these renewable support schemes for two overarching goals. We want to efficiently incentivize investments, so that they are being implemented according to political targets. And then also we want to integrate those assets into power markets with as little distortion as possible. And in that sense, contracts for difference, when they came up, they were a great innovation, because before that, support schemes often had quite many difficulties in integrating renewable assets into electricity markets. So that was quite some innovation, and that is because these contracts for difference, they work so that the renewable asset, power plant here, they actually are forced to sell power onto the spot markets. And then there is a separate transaction where the government support, as Paula also mentioned before, they're providing price stability through these financial hedges. So it's a purely financial transaction where these are provided. And I assume that most of you already know how in principle they work. So I will go through this for some terminology mostly, so that you know what I'm talking about when I use these different terminologies. So basically, the CFDs are formed so that there is a reference price, which is variable. It can be on hourly basis or monthly or also yearly basis. And from this reference price, there's a strike price, which is the most important price that's been negotiated between the state and the renewable producer. So that's the fixed price that should be stabilized, where revenues should be stabilized at. And then the difference between the reference price and the fixed strike price, that's the CFD payout. And then sometimes it happens that market prices or the reference price is higher than the strike price, and that's where these clawbacks come in. So that's what I call the clawbacks. So that's where the generator has to pay back to the state. So that's just for terminology. And sometimes it actually does happen that the reference price falls below zero. And in most implementations that we see at the moment, early on, it maybe has been the case that then there was a payout, a quite large payout. And of course, we want to avoid that. So in all the, actually, I think all the implementations that we're seeing at the moment, and this payout at these negative prices actually does not happen. So there is no payout during these times at the moment. All right, so when we look into these, the sum of the payouts and the clawback, what we've started to see as zero subsidy in our academic analysis is that if the payout and the clawback, if they are equally over time of the lifetime of the contract, then that's what we can call zero subsidy, because there is no net payout to the generator. Of course, this is not known in the beginning of the contract. So it is quite difficult for CFD designs to say if there is zero subsidy or not in the beginning of the contract, because we never know how large the yellow bars are and how large the blue bars are in the future. All right, so when and for which assets are CFDs relevant? First of all, when the market does not provide sufficient investment incentive. And I think we all know this is the case at the moment. We have seen on the markets, and Paula also showed that, it's quite common knowledge, sufficiently large and liquid long-term markets are missing at the moment to provide these investment incentives. It is not only when assets are unprofitable, and I think this is an important point. Renewable assets have a quite different cost structure than other fossil assets. I will show you in a second. These long-term markets are also necessary to achieve bankability for assets. So it's not only about profitability. So it's not only about actual net payout. These CFDs are also relevant, even if there's zero subsidy in the end. And then also, of course, they can also be relevant when governments wish to directly collect these revenues at high prices. And I think here it's also interesting to say that consumers or tax payments, they benefit as soon as these revenues are collected, no matter how you're actually giving them back to the consumers, if it's via the electricity bill or via other means. But we can also discuss that later. And then, of course, for which assets are these relevant? Basically, those who have very high upfront investment costs. So we've seen renewable assets, but also other assets can be relevant for that. And this is because these assets were very high upfront investment costs. They come in with a large financing in the beginning, and because of that, they have a large fixed cost block that they have to earn the revenues back. And if they are then exposed to volatile prices, this can be problematic for their cost structure. So they benefit much more from reduced exposure to volatile prices than other assets. So they need the stabilization of prices or revenue to achieve bankability. So if they are exposed to these volatile prices, it's very difficult to actually get the financing from the banks. But also the cost of the capital becomes much higher. And I have an example for that here on the next slide. So if you look on the left side, this is the lifetime cost distribution between renewables and fossil. And here you can see that for renewables, 90% of the costs are upfront or related to investment costs, whereas it's very little to fossil costs. And that's also why they're so much more exposed to volatile prices. And because these upfront costs are so high, they also make a very large cost of the overall lifetime, they make them also very much exposed to changes or increasing cost of capital over time, right? So that's on the right side. You can see that already at 8% cost of capital, the financing costs actually make half of the cost of renewables. So if we can change that a little bit and reduce that a little bit by price stabilization, we actually have a huge impact on the cost of the production cost. So it's both the bankability and then also the level of the cost of capital that makes it relevant for high capital intensive assets to use CFDs. And that's also why when there are no CFDs in the market, the assets are actually actively pursuing these long-term stabilization contracts on their own on the market. So they would only invest if there is a PPA available or other long-term contracts. But these are not there in sufficiently large volumes. All right, so what have we learned in terms of designing CFDs in the past? So there are two large categories. What do we want CFDs to achieve in terms of market incentivization? One is that they are being used optimally in the operations. And the second is that the investment decisions are made optimal. And I will show you what I mean. So first of all, we want to design the CFDs so that they always produce, so that the renewable assets always produce when the price is above the short-term variable cost. So they are not down-regulated too much. And they should never produce when the market prices are below the variable cost. And that should be on all markets so that they are efficiently dispatched, you can say. And then the second point is regarding utilization is that we would like them to schedule their maintenance at value optimal times. We've seen that in the past with maybe less sophisticated support schemes, that renewables have been out on maintenance when actually the prices, the value of electricity was very high, and we would like to avoid that as well. So we would like them to schedule at the optimal times. And then also regarding the siting, we would like to incentivize siting so that they maximize system value. So that we bring in the decisions regarding where can we help the system into the CFD design as well. So again, here, value optimal and from a system perspective, not from a project perspective. And then also, so this is about choosing the location, but also choosing the technology that has been implemented. This should be according to system-friendly technologies that have a generation profile that smoothens out overall production, for example. So these are the criteria that we would like to see in CFDs or in other support schemes as well. And I have an example here for these system-friendly decisions. And I have tried to structure it around the elements that I just mentioned before. So market bidding or production decisions, maintenance scheduling, and then also siting and layout decisions. And what we've seen is, these are just examples from some of the implementations that we've seen in CFDs. A distortive CFD design would be if you would have a full payout at all times. And I've showed that in the beginning regarding with the yellow and the blue boxes. If you would pay out at negative prices, then this is quite distortive, because then the renewable producer would produce or would not downregulate even with negative prices. And this is distortive maintenance and layout decisions would also is also happening when you have hourly reference pricing, because then they always see the same price, and they would not try to optimize between the different hours. So that is also something that we see. Then the revenue structure resembles more an old CFD, feed-in tariff, for example. Non-distortive, a little bit less distortive or more system-friendly design would be if we have a monthly average reference price, because then within the month, the renewable asset would try to schedule at value optimal times, so they can actually improve their revenues without having any impact on the reference price or the payout or the clawback. And this is also if you are broadening the averaging, for example, to a technology weighting instead of a plant-specific weighting. Most system-friendly, if we keep below, would be that, for example, if you do an annual averaging of the prices, because then the maintenance scheduling, the decisions would be over a larger area. So it would even include different seasons in the considerations regarding maintenance, for example. And also, if the average is from the reference price is done over a base load, this exposes the renewable generators to some price risk, and that's the price risk regarding the market value factor of the technology or of the plant, right? And it can actually incentivize the plants to be, to act against this market value factor and try to improve that. So it will incentivize system-friendly behavior as well. Yeah, regarding the market bidding, is actually quite simple. You can just stop the payout at negative prices, as I show, or prices below marginal cost if they're not around zero. That would be, for example, for a nuclear more the case, would be a little higher than zero. And then also regarding the clawback, that also needs to be adjusted so that can be stopped. But that's not a problem to do. Okay, that was quite quickly into some of the design details. So more general lessons learned is that in general, we can say CFDs are much more diverse than what it may seem like at first glance. So we have seen a lot of different design specifications. They're very context specific, and they're also evolving over time regarding different, different market situations. That they are in general always a produce and forget. They give these produce and forget incentives. I think that's wrong. We see a lot of implementations where that's not the case. And it is possible to design these incentive compatible CFDs, especially on the day ahead market. We've seen some best practices regarding longer term flat averaging and limiting clawbacks. I will just go to my last slide here. There are some unresolved issues around that. What we've not solved at the moment is that how do we avoid incentive spillovers into the intraday market, where sometimes at the moment plants are incentivized to shut down or to down-regulate too much. And also regarding hybrid plants or self-consumption plants, there might be some optimization issues around avoiding clawback times, which we need to solve. And there are several alternatives discussed, disconnecting the payout from the actual production of the CFD. That might solve some problems, but not all. So none of the suggestions that we've seen at the moment that are being discussed seem to be as one size fits all solution. But I'm also questioning if that's actually possible, if it's possible to have such a solution for all member states. Yeah, then there are some more open questions regarding the counterparty for the CFDs. We think that in cases where support is necessary, definitely the state or government are a good counterparty, but does not always have to be the case. When do CFDs constitute state aid? That's difficult. What is support if there is zero subsidy involved, and especially if we don't know in the beginning when we enter into the contract? And there are other effects regarding CFD rollout, I think, that we still need to look into. So yeah, interactions with PPAs, the volumes, the competition effects if all member states start to implement CFDs at the same time with the auctions. So that's still something that we need to look into. All right, sorry, Alberto, I think I went a bit over time, but
yeah, but thank you very much. Very interesting and very useful for the discussion later on, including the polls that we will have after the initial intervention of the panelists. So thank you very much, Paula. Thank you, Lena. I now turn to Ilaria to moderate the debate. Ilaria?
Sure, thank you very much, Alberto. I think we had a very good scene set by our two previous speakers. So now we are going to have a panel discussion. We have three panelists. I'm going to introduce them to you. Juan Jose Albarrios, he's Market Design Flagship Issue Manager representing Eurelectric. Welcome, Juan. Good to have you with us. We have also Peter Kleis, President of IFIEC. Peter, hello, representing the industrial consumers of energy. Very welcome. And Clara Poletti, Chair of the Board of Regulators at ACER, at the Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators in Ljubljana. Hello, Clara. Thanks for being with us. Great. So I would start by asking each of the panelists to provide some comments, some feedback on what we have heard until now. And we can try to perhaps stick to about 6 minutes each, if that's fine. And meanwhile, I renew my invitation to the participants to write in the Q&As whether there are Q&As box, whether there are any questions that we'll try to address later on. So we can start perhaps with Juan.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I hope that you can hear me well. Good. So certainly the two introductions that we have heard are very interesting and relevant for the topic that we are discussing. I would like to raise a few issues in relationship with this. One interesting thing that is included in the proposal of the Commission that has been mentioned by Paula and that was also mentioned by Alberto in his introduction is that we see, or the CFDs are seen in the proposal of the Commission as something that will deliver revenues for the consumers. And this is the wording that is used in the text of the proposal. I don't think that that is going to be the case most of the time. We are now in a very special crisis situation with very high prices, and certainly we have spent the last year and a half looking for ways of reducing the impact of those high prices on our consumers, and maybe we think that this situation will continue forever. But the reality is that sooner or later we will solve our dependency on natural gas. We will go back to our transition process of rapidly increasing the amount of renewables, and we will have a growing amount of renewables. In a significant part of Europe, those renewables will be wind and especially photovoltaic. If I look at the country that I know best, that is Spain, right now, probably Spain is a good example because it's going faster than other European countries in this regard. Right now, it's moving particularly fast in terms of permitting, it's moving particularly fast in terms of building new capacity. Right now, we have like 60,000 megawatts of wind and photovoltaic capacity that has already environmental permits and has already access to the network. So it's basically almost ready to start construction. In 2022, we have connected 8,500 megawatts of new wind and photovoltaic capacity. And probably we can easily connect roughly 10,000 megawatts of new renewable capacity per year. Based on Spanish legislation, all those 60,000 megawatts of new renewable capacity that are already almost ready to start construction should be online by summer 2025. Otherwise, they would lose some of the guarantees that they have had to put into the system. Probably it's impossible that all of them will be built, but a significant amount will be. So probably more than 20,000 megawatts of those megawatts will be constructed and will be online by summer 2025. That will completely destroy prices. We are already seeing, as of today, we're already seeing a significant number of hours at price zero. Those prices equal to zero in Spain are not due to inefficiencies in the design of the old feed-in tariffs and similar things, because we don't have feed-in tariffs in Spain anymore. They were removed with a retroactive reform, so they have disappeared. So basically, when we have prices that are equal to zero, is basically because there is a significant excess of renewable capacity injected in the system, plus other constraints derived from nuclear capacity, etc., etc. So at the end of the day, we have a significant amount of renewable capacity that will be entering the system, and this will not enter under market conditions, because under market conditions the prices will not support that investment. At the same time, our National Energy and Climate Plan and the plans of our government clearly point to a significant increase of renewables in the next year. So the government has already announced that they will continue running auctions for CFDs for this capacity. So the reality as soon as 2024, 2025 will be that in most of the time, the market prices will be below the strike price of those contracts for differences, and the renewable producers will receive money from the system, will not pay money to the system. So the problem will be how to allocate that cost to consumers. And that is an important point. It's obviously necessary for that. Despite that, I still think that the introduction of this contract for differences is necessary if we want to build renewables at the speed that we need them. And because even though I certainly prefer purely market-based solutions based on liquid forward markets and PPAs, even though we do as much as we can to increase the liquidity in forward markets and to increase the development of PPAs, it will be very difficult to reach all the consumers with PPAs, for instance, because especially for small consumers, that is quite complex. So certainly tools such as the CFDs will be necessary. But we have to bear in mind that those CFDs will not be a source of money, will be a significant part of the time, and in a significant part of Europe will be a source of costs. And we will have to think about how to allocate those costs. And probably Peter will have something to say about that. Obviously, I'm going back to the presentation by Lina. There are many issues in the design of the CFDs. Many of those issues have been ignored in the practical implementations that we see in Europe, and I think that we have to be especially careful with that. I would like to point out other elements that she hasn't mentioned. For instance, contracts for differences remove the incentive for renewable producers to operate in the forward markets in a moment in which we want to increase liquidity in the forward market. But if I use as a reference price, instead of the spot price, the forward prices, I can give an incentive to renewable producers to operate in the forward market. That is also something that we are looking for. So this is just one of the many possible elements in the design of CFDs that we have to explore and we have to take into account. And I will stop here.
Many thanks, Juan. Very, very clear, very interesting insights. I will move now to Peter, because at some point you almost passed the ball to him. So it's good to hear what his opinion is regarding the function of contracts for difference, as you mentioned it, as you explained it. Peter, please.
Thank you very much, Hilaria, and thank you for having me for this debate. First, CFDs are a subsidy. I mean, it is one type of subsidies which are complementing the revenues of power generators from several technologies by an extra. And I think 20 years after we started introducing more renewables into the system, I think we should more be considering how can we phase out subsidies for renewables rather than changing the form of them. At a certain moment, the technology has to be mature and has to be capable of entering into the market and into the system as such, without a subsidy. I think that's the first reflection. And by the way, we already have an instrument to push decarbonization of the power sector, which is called ETS. So in a way, a subsidy specifically for one technology here is complementary to what we are already doing in ETS. And I think at a certain moment we should consider stopping subsidies. Two, this being said, there are less intelligent ways of subsidizing renewables. That is true. CFDs are not maybe the best way of doing it, but they are definitely an improvement compared to some direct subsidy systems that we had in the past, based on LCOE, continuing to subsidize when prices were negative, etc., etc. So depending on the parameters that you use for implementing the CFD, it could be an intelligent way or a better way to subsidize renewables than other mechanisms. I think what is important is that you make them feel the market price, as is said by Lena and some other speakers. So this is an important element. Also, make sure there are no subsidies when prices become negative. This is an important element. The question also, who pays for the CFD? Is it society? Is it the electricity consumer? This might be a very important issue. But okay, it's potentially a good way, a better way of subsidizing renewables than other mechanisms. Three, and this is already said by Juan, I just wanna repeat it. I mean, it's an illusion to think that CFDs will bring up a lot of money for society. The more you invest in renewables, the more you will have when prices are low production. I mean, it's a bit the opposite of what Lena said in a presentation. It is not that when prices are high, you have to produce a lot. Unfortunately, with wind and sun, that is not possible. It's the opposite. When there's a lot of wind, prices will probably be low, and when there's a lot of sun, prices will probably be low also. So saying that we're going to get some money back from these CFDs is very unlikely, specifically if you increase the share of renewables into the system. And then a last comment: the bottom line for renewables and whatever way of promotion we put in place is that we have to find a solution for what I call the difficult problem with renewables. The easy problem is, what do you do with backup when there is no wind or sun? That we can solve. But the difficult one is, what do you do when there's too much electricity produced in windmills and solar panels? And then you have either the option to go to storage, or with batteries or other ways of storage, or to go to conversion. And this problem is very expensive today, or very difficult, for instance, for storage over longer periods. And this is where we have to work. And I think the best way of promoting renewables is finding solutions for this problem. Is, what do we do when we have excessive electricity generation by windmills and solar panels? And as long as we don't have an economically and technically feasible solution for that, the problem of promoting renewables will become only harder in the coming years and months. So thank you very much. Sorry for being a bit long, but some reflections on the CFDs.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. We are perfectly on time. You were perfectly on time. So we can now move to Clara for her remarks.
Thank you, Ilaria, and thank you, Alberto, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure, really. Okay, I think I would like to start from analyzing if CFDs are support schemes. And this has been mentioned many times, and I think it's important because it's linked to the state aid rules, is linked to what we need to prove in order to use that tool. So I was a bit surprised by the overall discussion, because what we are saying is that CFDs are subsidies, and subsidies to me means I give you money because the money at the market is not giving you enough, or your costs are above the market value. So I need to support you. I need to make you bankable. But at the same time, what I expect is that the result of the auction is a price, an average cost below an average market price that will translate into the system giving always money to those generators that are generating at a low cost. So to me, going back to what Lena was saying, is something that somehow is inconsistent in terms of timing. If I expect the price below cost, I cannot expect the market to develop that amount of renewables. So I need something to push in the right direction. Is the CFD the right tool? I think that it can be, but we need to change our CFDs. We need to make them smart, as we say. And I agree with a lot of what Lena said about things that in the market design we need to change. So are we paying too much if we use CFDs? My answer is, if we get auctions competitive enough, we are just paying the right price. So we wouldn't be able to have renewables and at the same time paying a lower price. So that's impossible to get. It's an impossible equation. In terms of CFDs vis-a-vis PPAs, I think there is a missing element, that is the counterpart risk in PPAs. And in fact, in the European Commission proposal, there is an obligation to hedge, or at least partly hedge, that counterpart risk, because it is too risky, because the consumer, the demand side, cannot really commit, or is too expensive for the demand side to commit on the longer term. And this is what we are seeing now in many European countries. So the CFDs have an important role in supporting, in helping hedging the counterpart risk, because the risk is taken by a counterpart that is reliable in itself. Is the CFD the only tool to increase liquidity and to help the market develop a longer term view? No, it's not, because PPAs are another tool. Maybe they are a better one for the industry and for bigger customers. And we have for sure the forward markets, but somehow I think they are a crucial item to help overall, I mean, to close the framework, if you want. Again, not the ones that we have today, not as they are designed today. We need to update the design. I believe we need to move to clarify many of the items that were in Lena's picture at the end, the slide at the end, like the profile. We need to clarify the production profile. We need to clarify the average price. So all those things need to be done. And I wonder if maybe a European guidance from Acer on how to design CFDs could be useful. I think an important element of CFDs to be effective is that they must be a standard product. The more we move from a standardized product to a sort of beauty contest, the less the auction, the competition in the auction. So we are losing somehow the track there, and the provision asking to give priority to CFDs that have to projects that have already a share of PPAs, for example, to me doesn't make sense. because it's like, how can I sort of decide on the merit order if I start translating the CFD into a beauty contest with different elements? So I stop here, Hilary.
Thank you. Very, very interesting insights, Clara, really. I think we are finished now with the first round of comments, and later we will give the opportunity also to Paola and Lena to maybe get back, clarify, as some questions were also received meanwhile. But now we have some polls, and I hand back the floor to Alberto.
Thank you, Ilaria. Very interesting initial statements from our panelists. And now we have 4 questions for the audience. In some cases, we sort of reopen some of the debate the Commission has come to the conclusion, but I think it's always good to double check whether the sentiment is still the same. In some cases, I said we provide more options than what the Commission has proposed in the draft legislation. So, Dan, if we could have the first question on the screen, please. And the first question is about the counterparty for the contracts for differences. So if the contract for differences were to become part of the long-term electricity market design, who should be the main counterparty? Should it be final consumers, suppliers, and possibly large final consumers, a central public or regulated entity, so the government, the state, whatever. None of the above if you have somebody else in mind, or if you have no views, then there is also the option of having no views. So please vote, and unfortunately, panelists, I don't think that they can vote. But you have other ways of expressing your views. And we have more than 100 participants, so it's not a representative sample, but it's quite a number. Okay, I think we should soon have the answers. Okay, it seems that in general, you subscribe to the idea that it should be a central counterparty, even though there were some respondents that also like the idea of involving final consumers or suppliers. So a decentralized approach to CFDs. Thank you very much. The second question is about, is about the features which we best avoid sort of the CFDs to preempt or to reduce the liquidity and the relevance of the spot market. The first option is that they are settled against a standard generation profile, as Lena mentioned, so irrespective of the actual generation profile of the contracted resources. The second possibility is cover only part of the generation of the contracted resources. Then you have also the opportunity to indicate that you think that other features could achieve better this objective. And also you can say you have no views. I guess Lena was pointing for the first option, but I don't want to influence the feedback from the audience. Well, that's interesting, because we have, also other options would be interesting. Other features would be interesting, but fortunately we don't have the opportunity now. But there also quite some attraction to the fact that CFD should only cover part of the generation of the contracted resources. The next one, it's about the standardization. I think Clara mentioned it, the important standardization. So again, if CFDs were to become part of the long-term market design, to what extent should they be standardized in order to facilitate, if anything else, their secondary trading? Do you think that it should be fully standardized, only partially standardized with, for example, reference to some design characteristics like the reference profile? Or you think there is no need to standardize CFDs, and again, you have the opportunity to saying that you have no views. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, Clara, no full standardization, apparently. Some standardization, but only on some features. Excellent. Last questions is about the duration of the contract for differences, and here clearly has to do with their roles in the market. So one possibility is 1 to 3 years, or which means more sort of commercial risk. 5 to 10 years, or 5 to 10 years with the possibility of unbundling them into shorter period CFDs, or over 10 years, which is clearly an investment horizon, but again with the opportunity of unbundling them over shorter period CFDs, or again the opportunity of having no views. Okay, I think. Well, unbundling seems to be a price, seems to be preferred, and clearly the sort of longer term is preferred. So probably well 5 to 10, or even beyond 10. But again, with a preference for being able then to cascading them into shorter period CFD. So thank you very much to all those who participated in the polls. And now I give the screen back to Ilaria for continuing the debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting results. I also noticed that we had quite some preferences for no views, and this is actually not so, doesn't happen that often. It's good when people come with more doubts than certainties, and maybe listen, to learn more. So it's very, very good as well, I think. So I would start maybe with Lena for first comments on these polls. And if you want, you can also already answer some of the questions which emerged during the panel round.
Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting. I'm a little bit surprised with the rather, with quite some preference for rather short-term CFDs, because that's one of the things that we argue for, that they need to be somewhat resembling the financing structure, which is usually 15 years plus for renewable assets. So yeah, that's interesting. These unbundling options, definitely something we need to look into, and standardization. I think that's one of the improvements, or making CFDs smarter, that we will look into, and maybe also need if there is a larger rollout. Yeah. And then one of the other things that I wanted to comment on is these features to avoid distortive behavior on spot markets. Regarding I think the standard generation profile was a little bit ahead of the partial volumes. I would assume that we will see both in the market, and both will be helping. That's interesting, I think. Regarding the so some of the questions that I've been hearing and seeing is, I think it's quite interesting. There are still some question marks regarding if we need CFDs or if we can use PPAs instead, and I completely agree that it would be good. So if the market can do it, let the market do whatever it can do. I would be very doubtful that there will be enough investment incentivization if we leave it to PPAs, even if they are securitized, and even if they are standardized products for PPAs. Of course, we need it. We need to have that. We need to have strengthened forward markets, but still, then I will be surprised. I don't expect that we will see the volumes that we need at the speed that we needed to achieve our decarbonization targets. So we will need both of it, and I think that's we'll need to stand on both legs and run forward to achieve the targets. So.
Many thanks, Lina. I see, Paula, you were nodding, so probably agreeing on the latest statements by Lina. Please. You should unmute yourself, please.
Sorry, I was double muted. We agree with that. I think from the Commission perspective is also kind of like the market should come first but what we see is that there's a gap, right? The market is not delivering alone the investments we need. So this is why it's important to have also public support. And yeah, on the results on the polls, I would say that from the regulator perspective, the best answer usually is this no views, right? So I think that from our perspective, and this is what we have tried to put into the proposal as well, it's important that all options are possible, so that there's no prescriptive way of saying what member states can do or not. So there's a possibility open for different forms of support schemes to be tested by different member states, so that at the end of the day we can see which one is better, which is less disruptive with the market functioning, etc. On a personal note, I was also surprised by the responses on the last question on the typical duration of contracts for differences. The input that we've got from industry, from generators, is that for PPAs, which at the end PPAs and CFDs are more or less the same thing, right? The only thing is that the counterparty is a public body. Usually, it's unlikely to have them of less than 10-15 years, because the generators want to have the life of the asset to be covered in order to make it bankable. So, but yeah, this is more on a personal note. So this is my feedback.
Great, many thanks, Paula. Okay, so now I would go in reverse order, starting from Clara to comment on the polls.
Thank you. On the profile and the partial, just a share of the generation, I agree that we are going to see both, because at the end of the day, the CFD assessing the risk connected to the CFD is something complex that depends really on how the CFD is designed. So I think probably we will need the flexibility to allow just for a partial capacity solution on the generation profile. I think that's very important. This is something we need to do, because otherwise, what are we buying as a system somehow? Because as Alberto said at the beginning, CFD is a way to stabilize the revenues for generators, but it's a way to stabilize costs for consumers as well. And so we really need to know what we are buying. And that brings an additional problem that has not been discussed, or maybe only laterally, that is the flexibility and the storage. If I buy a base load, what can I do as generator in order to ensure that that I can deliver the base load? I can face the risk connected to the base load provision. I need either to have storage available in the market, so I can buy flexibility, or I can be flexible myself, or is something that is strictly linked, that is very important to keep in mind. On the standardization, I didn't mean that we need a EU-wide standardization. So I agree that probably partial standardization at EU level could work. I only think that at national level, we don't want to have provisions coming from Europe saying you have to give a value to the generator that has a hydrolyzer as well, or has a PPA, or maybe is green or yellow or red. That's not a standard product. That's very difficult to auction.
Clear. Many thanks, Clara. Peter.
Thank you. Yeah, very briefly on the first poll. Well, the counterpart for CFDs, in my eyes, and also to react to Clara's first question, are CFDs a support mechanism? In my eyes, if the CFD is concluded, is contracted with a public authority, it is a subsidy in the end, because you guarantee a revenue to the investor one way or the other. Even if you claw back some of the revenues in some circumstances from that investor, you guarantee a minimum return on his investments, and in that sense, to me, it's a subsidy. Second, I'm a bit puzzled also by the special feature to have the CFD based on a specific standardized profile. That would mean you're not in the market and you're not responding to market signals. I think that would not be the right choice, but some other people already told that. On the last poll, I don't see how a 1 to 3 or even a 5 to 10 CFD could convince somebody to invest in a new renewable plant, in a windmill, or in solar panels. I think you need a very long duration if you want to use the instrument as an investment signal, as a support mechanism to invest. If it's of course a mechanism for existing windmills, then you can go to shorter terms. And then a last reaction was to something that Paula said, where apparently they don't believe that the market today leads to sufficient investments in generation capacity or in climate neutral generation capacity. Where does that put ETS? Isn't that a sufficient mechanism to decarbonize the power sector and part of the industry by reducing the number of available emission rights, or have we lost our confidence in ETS as a mechanism to do the job? Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Juan.
Yes, one comment regarding Peter's comment. So actually, the design of CFDs based on a standard profile, or for instance, what is called in a proposal by ELIA, the capability-based CFDs, is actually a very good way of incentivizing the counterparty of the CFD to react to market signals. Actually, this is in general is better than a CFD that is based on the actual profile of production of the plant. So it's certainly something that makes sense. I don't think we have time to go into the detail about that right now, but it's something that makes sense. It all obviously creates some risks for the owner of the plant, but also it creates some positive incentives. Certainly, regarding the elements that have been discussed in the polls, the standardization, I think, is necessary. But we will have to accept that precisely the variety of design criteria will create some link between the design of the CFD and the technology. So probably we will not be able to settle for a single design for CFDs. We will need like a toolbox of CFD designs. Second, certainly we have to remove from the criteria things that are not objective. In some cases, in auctions for CFDs, states like to introduce elements of industrial policy or of social benefit of the plant, etc., etc. Those are very difficult to treat in an objective way, and I think that removes transparency from the process. So I think it's better to focus on allocation mechanisms that take into account objective criteria, something around auctions. Certainly, the combination of the plant with other interesting capabilities, such as storage, as is mentioned in one of the questions by our audience, is something that we also have to take into account. Considering that in the auction might be difficult, but this could be, for instance, a requirement, and you could require for all renewable facilities to include a certain amount of storage as a prerequisite to participate in the auction, and it is something that could be, let's say, like left aside in the assessment of the auction. Certainly, in my opinion, CFDs are good for technologies that are not manageable, such as wind or photovoltaic, for instance, but are not the good solution for flexible technologies, for storage and things like that. There are other remuneration mechanisms that are better for storage or for other kind of flexible and firm technologies that should be used preferably for this kind of technologies.
Very good. Many thanks for all your comments. Well, we have maybe a few minutes for a couple of questions, maybe from the chat, but actually thanks, because some of you already addressed some of them. I think I will just opt for the most voted one. I would like to hear views on whether the contract for different mechanism is best suited to promoting hybrid co-location projects or whether something else is needed in order to recognize the value of these projects, as we are talking about future-proof electricity market design. So what is the view of the panel, or who would like to take this question?
I think I already mentioned that in my previous comment. Say, for instance, when we are talking about hybridization of renewable plus storage, I think that the existence of a given amount of storage could be included as a prerequisite to participate in the auction for the CFDs. But if we want to go for something more complex, hybridizing different technologies, etc., probably, I think that the only way there is to try to go for a relatively simple and standard design of CFDs, and then leave the participants go with whatever combination of technologies they want to go, and the victory for the most efficient one.
I agree with Juan. I don't have anything to add.
Perfect. Okay, well, Peter, no, nobody else. Okay. So
maybe I can just
Lena, please.
also just jump in there, because I think it's one of the things is important to mention also, that when everything is only on price competition, we also risk that we are draining the sector from innovation capacity and things like that. So I think that's also one element to consider, and that's also one of the things that we are looking into. Could it make sense maybe to limit clawback at certain times? That could also help with innovation potential regarding, or also avoid sub-optimization regarding hybrid plants or energy carrier optimization. So I think that's really something that we need to look into the future, because that it will become larger. It will become a larger problem as well if we don't do anything about it. And also we would like this sector to keep being attractive and interesting for new entrants, for investors. So that's also something that needs to be taken into account. And remaining on price only auctions, as we've seen, is maybe not doing the job in the future. So we will have to look into that.
Thanks, Lena. I see lots of nodding also on your intervention. Peter.
Yes, yeah, very briefly. That's the second best solution. I mean, the best way of promoting innovation and progress in technology, etc., is by allowing competition and by not subsidizing, but making sure that there's a competition between producers. So, saying that we need to have subsidies, but then limit the clawback and leave some room for competition is a second best solution compared to a real competition based on no subsidies. But okay, that's my position.
Yeah, maybe if I can also react to this, because there was also mentioned before. So indeed, I think that we all agree, probably we all agree around this table, that the best thing is the market. I think that nobody disagrees. I will put my, all the faith. But the member states, they have objectives of introduction of renewables in the system. We have the decarbonization objectives, and the reality of the thing is that we are lagging behind what we should do. So I think I would also like to clarify. So yeah, CFDs are only one of the legs of the Commission proposal. The other very important leg, and it's very clearly stated, that member states should really promote the PPA market in order to achieve the decarbonization target, and they should provide offtake guarantees in order, because we have seen that this is really one of the barriers for the development of the PPA market. And at the beginning of his presentation, Juan was mentioning the success of renewable energy development in Spain, and probably one of the key elements of this success is also that in Spain they have this offtake guarantee scheme, the FERGEI, that is really promoting the uptake of PPAs in the market. But even like that, it might be the case in many or all member states that this is not enough to get to the objectives. And this is where the CFDs enter into scene. It's just like a second, it's like a safeguard, say. And I think we all agree with this. And then regarding on the ETS, so indeed, this is a signal for the more pollutant generator plans to get out of the market, but probably this is not enough to make bankable the renewable projects. So projects that they are not finding financing through private contracts through PPAs, there might be some of them that they can be financed by public support.
Thank you, Paula, for the clarification. I like this is a real debate with different opinions. Very good. I give the floor to Clara as she raised her hand before.
Yes, just I would like to say that PPAs, in my mind, are not at all the tool to support innovation. So we need that. That's a completely different chapter. Is key. It's very important. But probably we need to define specific tools for technologies that are still to be developed. Probably storage is less mature than wind anyway. So we really need to think about that. But I don't see CFDs as the right tool there. And on PPAs, I'm going to provoke and to be a bit provocative. Are we sure that supporting and socializing the cost of counterpart risk, because this is what we are doing, putting money on the pot and saying, okay, if you're a customer just decides to leave or is going to shut down or simply the price goes down and the PPA price is too high, I just disappear, I go somewhere else, but there is somebody else that is paying, and to me that's a subsidy. So subsidizing for the counterpart risk is more efficient than handling centrally the counterparts risk through auctioning. And I'm not saying that PPAs are not going to play a big role, just raising a question on how to hedge the counterparts risk.
Thanks, Clara. Juan, final quick remark, please.
Yes, this goes very much related to what Clara said. So the issue of the counterparty is critical, and I think it's something that hasn't received enough attention. For instance, the CFD auctions that are in place in Spain are linked to a settlement of the CFDs to all demand. This sounds like something efficient and equitable, but it creates problems. Depending on how you make that settlement, the CFD can act for the consumer in the opposite way as it acts for the generator. So actually, it removes the price variations for the consumer. But there are consumers who need to see that price variation. For instance, consumers who have storage or consumers who are interested in demand-side response are worse off if that price variation is reduced. Also, if I am, for instance, willing to invest in an electrolyzer, I am looking for hours with very low prices. So I am not interested in the hedge delivered by the CFD, because actually I want to go for the zero price hours to use my electrolyzer in those hours. So it's very tricky. Even if we have either a central state-owned counterparty or a direct settlement of the CFD against the final demand, as is the case in Spain, it's very tricky to decide which part of the demand has to pay for that and what is the exact way of allocating the settlement to the demand. I think this is an issue that has received less attention than other aspects of CFD design, and is certainly worth looking at, because we will be dealing with that problem significantly in the next future.
Great. Thank you, Juan, and thank you all for this lively debate. I will now hand the floor back to Alberto, please.
Well, thank you, Larry, and thank you to everyone for a really lovely debate. I think it's difficult to conclude because I think what came out of this debate, if it were necessary, is that there are still a number of design elements that would need to be addressed before the CFDs can be implemented properly to be part of the future-proof market design. I think the Commission was right in being sort of general at this stage of the debate, because we are not yet sure which is the best design fit for the future. But between the legislation and the implementation of the legislation, we'll have to come up with well, at least some views as to whether, for example, the degree of standardization, the length of these contracts, what are they settled against? The guarantees one just mentioned, the issue which has been an issue all the time. I mean, CFDs, we started to discuss CFDs even before the crisis. I remember in 2019, we started to look into the longer term market design of a market that at that time looked different from what it has developed over the last two years. But then one may be right, and it may go back towards something that looked like what we were expecting, even though I don't think it would go back to where we were expecting it to be by now. So I think there is still a lot of work to be done. Clara mentioned maybe the role of ACER in coming up with some guidelines for regulators, even though this is not necessary just for the regulators, it's for the member state to take and adopt the design that they think fit. But obviously regulators and ACER can play a role in trying to make sense out of the different options and avoid member states going their own way on something which we may regret afterwards. So I think there's been a very interesting debate. I apologize for those who have asked questions and we were not able to cover them. I would like to thank all those who contributed to it. So Paula and Lena, and then Juan, Peter, and Clara. Thank Ilaria for co-hosting it with me, and last but not least, thanking Daniela Bernardo, who's been on the background, but without whom none of this could have been possible. The next episode of this series is actually on the, I think, 3rd of May, if I'm not mistaken. And we will switch to gas. It's not yet certain, but one
in the
topic,
making.
exactly, one topic that we are sort of considering is, Ilaria, do you want to reveal?
The joint purchasing mechanism.
For gas.
So, yes.
Again, something in the making, something that has just been sort of launched recently, and we could take stock of the first experience out of that. So please follow us. In the meanwhile, thanks again to everybody, to the audience, and, well, I guess, happy Easter.
Happy Easter. Yes.
Thank you very much.